Today I come before you not just as your former president, but as a citizen deeply moved by recent events unfolding across our nation. Over the past few days, we've witnessed something unexpected, something powerful. A name that, until recently, many in this country had never heard has now become a rallying cry in our streets, Ibrahim Traoré. Now let me be clear, I was shocked, as many of you were, to see his face on banners, hear his words echo through megaphones in cities from New York to Los Angeles, and feel the passion he's ignited among young Americans. It wasn't from one of our politicians. It wasn't from the media. It came from somewhere else, from a voice overseas, a leader many wouldn't expect to resonate here. And yet, here we are. You might ask, why Traoré? Why now? And the answer is as simple as it is profound. People, especially young people, are hungry for truth, for courage, for independence. They're tired of being told to sit down and be quiet. They're tired of politics as usual, of policies that only serve the few while leaving the many behind. Ibrahim Traoré, with his bold defiance of old systems and his message of self-reliance, of throwing off foreign control and standing proud, he struck a nerve. Now, I don't agree with everything he says, and no, I don't support foreign leaders interfering with American politics. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't understand the appeal. His rise to fame here, in the heart of American protests, isn't just about him, it's about what he represents. Strength, change, a refusal to be controlled. That's something I've always believed in, America first, but what we're seeing now is something more global. Young people looking around the world and asking, who's actually standing up? They're finding inspiration in places we never expected. We are at a turning point, not just in this country, but across the globe. People are waking up. The elite, the establishment, they're nervous. And maybe they should be. Because when someone like Traoré goes viral in the United States, it means the ground is shifting. The old narratives are cracking. To the American people, I say this: never be afraid to question. Never be afraid to demand more. Look around, listen closely, think critically, and above all, stand tall. We are still the greatest country in the world, but even we can learn from others about courage, about freedom, about refusing to back down. Ibrahim Traoré's rise in the context of US protests is something that has taken many by surprise. Yet it reflects a deeper, more profound shift happening within American society, especially among its youth. At first glance, the image of a young African leader appearing on signs and murals in American cities seems unusual, even disconnected. But a closer look reveals a clear reason for this phenomenon: the search for authentic, bold leadership that dares to challenge systems of power, both foreign and domestic. Young Americans are tired of the same rhetoric from the same political figures. They want change, not just in words, but in action. Traoré, the interim leader of Burkina Faso, captured international attention for his unapologetic stance against neocolonial influence and for his efforts to restore sovereignty to his country. In the eyes of many, especially those disillusioned with American politics, he represents what they've been looking for: a leader who doesn't cater to elites, who speaks with clarity and conviction, and who puts the needs of his people above global political games. This type of leadership, rare in both African and Western politics, has struck a chord across the ocean with those who feel increasingly unrepresented. In many American cities, protests over inequality, systemic injustice, and the influence of corporate and foreign interests have intensified in recent years. Within these movements, the traditional icons of protest, local politicians, historical figures, or even celebrities, no longer seem sufficient. What Traoré symbolizes is not just political leadership, but resistance. Resistance to domination, resistance to silence, resistance to the idea that small nations or marginalized communities should accept the status quo. That symbolism resonates powerfully with young Americans who feel their voices are ignored in Washington, who believe their futures are being sold off by an older generation that prioritizes profit over people. The fact that someone like Traore, relatively unknown in mainstream US media until recently, could go viral in American protests speaks to the changing nature of global influence. It's no longer about who has the biggest economy or military, it's about who has the courage to speak truths others are too afraid to say. Social media has played a huge role in this. In just a few clicks, videos of Traore speaking passionately about independence and integrity have reached millions. His words, though aimed at the African continent, hit home in a country where many young people feel similarly oppressed by student debt, by racial inequality, by political stagnation, and by a sense of being voiceless in decisions that shape their lives. For these reasons, Traore has become more than a foreign leader. He's become a symbol, not of nationalism, but of self-determination, not of violence, but of strength, and not of division, but of awakening. His rise in American protests is not about ideology alone, it's about inspiration. It's about the generation refusing to accept the world as it is and daring to imagine what it could be. Traoré didn't ask to be a part of this American moment, but his presence within it tells us that leadership now knows no borders. The cries for justice in the streets of Chicago or Atlanta echo the demands for freedom in Ouagadougou. In both cases, people are standing up, and they're looking to those who have the courage to lead, regardless of where they come from. The sudden rise of Ibrahim Traoré as a figure of influence within American protests has caught many political leaders off guard, especially former President Donald Trump. Known for his nationalist rhetoric and firm belief in American exceptionalism, Trump's public reaction to Traoré's viral presence was one of visible surprise. That a foreign leader, particularly one from a small West African nation, could resonate so strongly with a segment of the American population is not something that fits neatly into the traditional narrative of US politics. Trump, like many others in positions of power, did not anticipate that someone outside the familiar political sphere could capture the imagination and frustration of American protesters. This reaction underscores a larger issue, a disconnect between the political establishment and the evolving sentiments of the people they claim to represent. For decades, American leaders have largely believed that the public looks inward for guidance and inspiration, turning to US history, its founding ideals, or its own political icons. But what we are witnessing now is a subtle shift. Traoré's growing relevance in the American socio-political dialogue reveals that people, especially younger generations, are increasingly global in their thinking. They are paying attention not only to what is happening in Washington, but also to leaders abroad who appear to act with integrity, authenticity, and fearlessness. For someone like Trump, who has built his political brand around the idea of American strength and independence, the fact that an African military leader has become a symbol of resistance and empowerment in US protests is undoubtedly jarring. It challenges the assumption that only American figures can lead or inspire American movements. During a recent speech, Trump commented on the matter with what appeared to be a mix of bewilderment and caution. He acknowledged Traoré's influence, but framed it as a symptom of larger frustrations at home. Frustrations he claims were once addressed by his own presidency, yet his tone carried an undercurrent of disbelief. It was a rare moment where the former president admitted that the cultural tides are shifting in ways that even he did not foresee. Other US leaders, both Democrat and Republican, have largely remained silent on the issue, perhaps not wanting to give additional attention to a narrative they cannot control, but their silence also speaks volumes. It reveals an unease about the fact that American influence no longer flows in just one direction. The idea that young Americans are lifting up the words of a foreign leader, plastering his quotes on signs and chanting his name in protests, signals a moment of reckoning. American leadership is being compared, consciously or not, to international figures, and not always favorably. This shift is not necessarily about ideology, but about authenticity and conviction. Traoré's appeal lies in his refusal to bow to external pressures, his call for national dignity, and his unapologetic stance against exploitation. These are values that resonate with many Americans who feel their own country has been compromised by corporate greed, political corruption, and systemic inequality. To them, Traore's voice represents something unfiltered, something powerful, and something absent from the voices they're used to hearing on Capitol Hill. In the end, Trump's shock is less about Traore himself and more about what his popularity reveals. It exposes the vulnerabilities of the American political system, the failures of its leaders to connect with younger citizens, and the growing hunger for leaders regardless of nationality who speak boldly and act decisively. Whether American politicians like it or not, the world is becoming more interconnected, and influence now travels both ways. Traore's emergence as a voice within American protests is a symbol of that changing reality, and it's forcing even the most seasoned political figures to take notice. Across the United States, there is a growing sense of frustration among young people who feel abandoned by the very institutions meant to protect and represent them. This generation, facing mounting student debt, unaffordable housing, job insecurity, and systemic inequality, is increasingly disillusioned with traditional politics. They no longer find hope in the polished speeches of career politicians or the promises of billion-dollar campaigns. Instead, they are looking for voices that speak directly to their lived realities, voices that are raw, uncompromising, and unafraid to challenge entrenched systems of power. It is in this climate that Ibrahim Traoré's message has found unexpected yet powerful resonance. Traoré, the interim president of Burkina Faso, has gained global attention for his unapologetic stance on self-reliance, anti-imperialism, and national sovereignty. In his speeches, he denounces the continued economic and political domination of African nations by former colonial powers and calls for a new era of independence, one where countries reclaim their resources, their identities, and their futures. What has surprised many observers is how this message has transcended borders and found a powerful echo among young Americans, particularly those engaged in protest and grassroots organizing. At the heart of Traoré's appeal is a call for truth. He does not hide behind vague language or diplomatic niceties. He speaks with urgency about the need to confront exploitation, to name the systems that continue to extract wealth and power from the hands of ordinary people, whether in Africa or elsewhere. For young Americans, this kind of clarity is rare. They are used to leaders who avoid accountability, who speak in circles, and who rarely take bold stances. Traoré's words feel different, fearless, and grounded in principle. His emphasis on independence, both national and personal, also resonates deeply with a generation that feels increasingly controlled by debt, surveillance, corporate influence, and the monopolization of basic needs like healthcare and education. Young people in the US are tired of being told that the system works when their daily experience tells them otherwise. When Traoré talks about building a future without dependency on foreign aid or exploitative partnerships, many young Americans hear a parallel call to free themselves from the grip of a political system that serves the few at the expense of the many. Grassroots movements in the US have long emphasized local empowerment, mutual aid, and self-determination. These are not new ideas, but Traoré's leadership brings fresh global validation to them. His rise suggests that these values are not just idealistic dreams, but legitimate strategies for national transformation. Protesters who feel ignored by Washington find inspiration in a leader who rose from the ranks of the military, who is young, who faces immense pressure from global powers, yet refuses to compromise on the dignity of his people. Moreover, Traoré's anti-imperialist message hits home in a country where many young people are increasingly questioning America's own role in the world. They are asking why the US maintains hundreds of military bases overseas, why it continues to interfere in the politics of other nations, and why so much taxpayer money is spent on foreign wars, while communities at home go without clean water, proper schools, or affordable homes. When Traoré speaks of rejecting foreign control, it resonates not only as an international stance, but also as a local metaphor. for rejecting the systems that control people's lives without their consent. In this sense, Traoré's message has become more than a foreign ideology. It has been absorbed into the growing cry for change in the United States, a cry for truth, for real independence, and for leadership that reflects the will of the people rather than the interests of the elite. For many young Americans, this cry is not just about politics, it is about reclaiming their future. And in Traoré, they see a symbol of what is possible when someone stands up and refuses to be ruled by fear or compromise. The rapid and widespread rise of Ibrahim Traoré's image in American protests is not merely a viral trend. It represents a deeper and more significant challenge to the establishment. Across the political spectrum, both in the United States and globally, people are beginning to question the legitimacy and effectiveness of existing systems of power. Traoré's sudden presence in conversations, social media feeds, protest signs, and public discourse reflects a growing dissatisfaction with the elite institutions that have long dictated the direction of political and economic life. His rise speaks not just to who he is, but to what he symbolizes: resistance, disruption, and the courage to challenge the status quo. In many ways, Traoré's popularity is a referendum on elite control. It is a loud, visual, and emotional statement that the current systems of governance are failing large segments of the population. In the United States, young people feel disillusioned with both major political parties, which they see as more interested in maintaining power than delivering meaningful change. The Democrats and Republicans, despite their differences, are often viewed as two sides of the same coin, beholden to corporate donors, financial institutions, and global interests. This perception has created a vacuum of trust, and into that vacuum steps someone like Traoré, whose rise is not manufactured by media consultants or corporate sponsorship, but appears rooted in genuine conviction and defiance. The establishment, both in America and abroad, is built on the premise that authority must be centralized and orderly, that leadership should be carefully groomed, and that global affairs must be managed by technocrats and seasoned policymakers. Traoré's appeal flies in the face of that model. He is young, military-trained, and unapologetically radical in his approach. He speaks plainly about the dangers of foreign interference, the exploitation of natural resources, and the need for people to reclaim power from those who have abused it. This messaging, once thought too provocative or irrelevant for Western audiences, now resonates deeply with a generation that sees its future being traded for short-term profits and political expediency. The virality of Traoré's image is also a technological rebellion. In the past, the establishment controlled the flow of information through mainstream media, shaping public perception by deciding who got airtime and how narratives were framed. But in the digital age, those gatekeepers have lost much of their influence. Videos of Traoré's speeches, clips of his confrontations with foreign dignitaries, and quotes from his public addresses are now being shared organically across social media platforms, reaching millions without the filter of editorial control. This decentralized spread of information has made it difficult for traditional powers to contain or discredit him, and even harder for them to control the interpretation of his message. What's even more telling is how little effort has been made by US elites to engage with the reasons behind his growing popularity. Instead of asking why so many young people are drawn to Traoré's defiant stance, many within the establishment respond with silence, dismissiveness, or subtle condemnation. This refusal to engage reveals a blind spot, an inability or unwillingness to recognize that legitimacy must be constantly earned, not assumed. Traoré, by virtue of his outsider status and bold rhetoric, poses an ideological threat to those in power who depend on passivity and complacency to maintain control. In the end, the challenge that Traoré presents is not about geopolitics alone. It's a spiritual and psychological challenge to people across the globe who have come to believe that politics is inherently corrupt, that change is impossible, and that the powerful always win. His emergence disrupts that cynicism. Whether one agrees with all of his views or not, the fact that he has ignited such a strong emotional and political response is proof that the world is ready, perhaps even desperate, for a new kind of leadership, one that does not answer to the establishment, but to the people themselves. In today's interconnected world, the lines between local and global struggles are increasingly blurred. Nowhere is this more evident than in the way young Americans are drawing inspiration from leaders outside their own borders, figures who represent the fight against oppression, exploitation, and foreign dominance. The emergence of Ibrahim Traoré as a symbolic figure in American protest culture is a clear reflection of this trend. Traoré, a military leader from Burkina Faso known for challenging foreign interference in African affairs, has become a surprising yet potent source of motivation for many young people in the United States, who see parallels between his mission and their own demands for justice and autonomy. For much of American history, the country has portrayed itself as the epicenter of democracy, a model for others to emulate, but recent decades have revealed cracks in that image, from mass surveillance and racial inequality to economic injustice and political polarization. More and more Americans, especially the younger generation, are beginning to view their country not as an example to follow, but as one that also needs deep transformation. As a result, they're looking outward, searching for examples of leaders who are unafraid to confront powerful interests and reassert the rights of their people. This search has led many to discover leaders like Traoré. His defiance of neo-colonial control, his prioritization of national sovereignty, and his willingness to speak boldly about injustice resonate with a generation that feels its own nation is being undermined by corporate greed, political inertia, and foreign entanglements. Traoré's unapologetic commitment to self-determination, particularly in the face of economic and political pressure from powerful international actors, is seen as a form of resistance that transcends geography. His story offers a mirror for Americans frustrated by systemic problems and a lack of political will to address them. In movements across the U.S., from protests against police violence to climate justice campaigns, there is a growing awareness that the forces of oppression are not only domestic, they are also global, rooted in trade agreements, military interventions, resource exploitation, and transnational corporate interests. The courage of leaders like Traoré, who openly challenges these structures in their own regions, has provided activists in the United States with a sense of solidarity and a broader framework for understanding their struggle. The idea is no longer just about fixing America from within, but about being part of a larger global movement that seeks to dismantle systems of domination wherever they exist. Social media has played a powerful role in this shift. In previous generations, global figures often remained distant, known only through traditional news outlets or historical texts. But now, video clips, speeches, and interviews are widely shared online, allowing millions of people to hear unfiltered voices and witness leadership styles that differ dramatically from those seen in the U.S. political establishment. Through platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and Twitter, young people can connect with movements in Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East, drawing inspiration not just from what those leaders say, but how they say it and what they risk to do so. In this climate, figures like Traoré don't simply represent foreign politics. They become part of the global imagination for change. They remind American youth that courage, honesty, and action are universal values not bound by borders or traditions. And they show that true leadership often comes from those who are willing to lose everything in service of their people, rather than those who seek only to maintain power. This global perspective is reshaping how Americans see their role in the world and in their own democracy. They are realizing that to change their country, they must also understand how global systems affect their lives. And in looking outward, they are finding the strength to act inward, to demand accountability, fight exploitation, and build a more just and liberated future at home. In a rare moment of reflection during a recent speech, former President Donald Trump addressed the unexpected influence of Ibrahim Traoré on American youth and protest culture. While many might have expected him to dismiss or ignore the growing admiration for the young African leader, Trump instead used the moment to deliver a broader message, one that urged Americans to engage more critically with the world around them. His words carried a tone of caution, but also a call to action. Stay alert, question everything, and recognize that strength and truth sometimes emerge from the most unexpected places. Trump's message resonated not because it came from a place of endorsement, but because it acknowledged a fundamental shift occurring in American consciousness. For years, Americans were taught to look inward for leadership and truth, to trust that their systems, traditions, and values were unmatched and unquestionable. But this belief is no longer universally held. The rise of foreign figures like Traore in the minds of American protesters signals a transformation in how many, especially the younger generation, interpret leadership, justice, and truth. In response, Trump's speech encouraged Americans not to fear this shift, but to meet it with open eyes and critical thinking. Critical thinking, once considered a cornerstone of American civic life, has increasingly been overshadowed by political tribalism and media echo chambers. Trump's call to question dominant narratives was, in that sense, a challenge to both sides of the political aisle. He emphasized the importance of not blindly accepting what is presented by mainstream outlets or popular influencers. Whether it's praise for a foreign leader or condemnation of domestic institutions, he urged Americans to investigate, analyze, and draw their own conclusions. In an era defined by misinformation and selective outrage, this appeal for independent thought struck a meaningful chord. At the same time, Trump reminded Americans to remain proud, not in a superficial or arrogant sense, but proud of the foundational values that once defined the American spirit: liberty, resilience, and courage. This pride, he argued, must be paired with humility and awareness. For too long, he noted, Americans have been told that greatness can only be found within their own borders. But history and recent events have shown that courage and truth are not confined to any one nation. Leaders in the global South, often overlooked or dismissed by Western media, are rising to confront injustice and reclaim sovereignty. That these voices are now being heard in the streets of American cities is not a threat, it's a sign of awakening. By acknowledging the influence of someone like Traore, Trump subtly reinforced the idea that global awareness is not at odds with national pride. Rather, the ability to recognize strength and truth in others, regardless of where they come from, is itself a strength. It reflects a maturity and depth of thought that the country must cultivate if it is to move forward. Americans, he said, should not be afraid to draw inspiration from any source that challenges them to think deeper, act bolder, and believe in their own power to shape history. His words were not without political undertones, of course. He positioned himself as someone who had also been vilified for challenging the status quo, drawing a parallel between his own battles with the political establishment and the defiance of figures like Traore. But beyond the politics, the message stood clear. The world is changing, and with that change comes an opportunity for Americans to look beyond fear, beyond division, and begin asking the hard questions again. Trump's appeal, whether embraced fully or not, left an undeniable impression. In a time of uncertainty and widespread disillusionment, his call for critical thinking and courage served as a reminder that truth is not always handed down from familiar places. Sometimes it comes from voices we never expected to hear, but ones we must learn to listen to if we hope to evolve.